Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Friday afternoon. Some massive news for the Georgia Bulldogs coming out of the recruiting trail. Five-star defensive lineman Elijah Griffin committing to Georgia in the 2025 cycle. Now, we've talked a lot about this kid, kind of expected him to wind up in Georgia's class. Maybe took a little bit longer than a lot of Georgia fans expected. Makes it official on October 18th. And you look at Elijah Griffin and you kind of start with what's made Georgia different from just about every single program we have seen over the last 5 years. It's these kind of guys all along the defensive line, the game wreckers, the guys that, they don't grow on trees, but every single one of these guys seems to wind up in Athens, Georgia to play their college football. This is the quote unquote secret recipe for Kriby Smart in this Georgia program, just having a physically different defensive front than any other team in the country. And Elijah Griffin's one of those guys that continues that trend for Georgia. A guy that I think steps on the field immediately and is an impact kind of guy, not only because of the athletic profile. You start diving in and say 6'5, 285, extremely long in the arms, 35-inch vert. How polished this kid is as a defensive lineman, it's kind of next level. I mean, how he uses not only the athleticism but the hands to disengage from offensive linemen. There are so many different ways, whether it's speed, whether it's power, whether it's technique, that he can beat interior offensive linemen. That's what you're getting in Elijah Griffin. But I think most importantly, he's a game wrecker. And you see kind of different defensive linemen that Georgia likes to go after. You have the two gappers, the guys like Nazir Stackhouse, who aren't necessarily going to light it up on the stat sheet, but are certainly playing a very important role in that Georgia defensive front. And then you have guys like Elijah Griffin, or I would even say like Jalen Carter, the guys that are penetrators, the guys get behind the line of scrimmage, give a lot of juice in the pass rush. That's kind of the standard that I have for Elijah Griffin heading into his collegiate career. I think there's a reason he's a top 5 national prospect, the number one player in the country that's not a quarterback. This one's massive for Georgia. Excited to get into it. Now, before we do, and as always, to the Georgia fans, that whether it's 2024, whether it's on the recruiting trail, y'all know we love talking this program. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And it does sound like, you had Jared Curtis decommit from Georgia last night. There's still some momentum brewing for Georgia on the recruiting trail. We're going to talk about some other prospects as well in this 2025 class, but I want to start with Elijah Griffin. Now, we talked about the athletic profile. Like this kid, and again, when you're recruiting defensive linemen, that is the number one thing you're looking for. Give me the freaks. Like, give me the guys who are just bigger, stronger, faster than any other prospect in the country. That's where you start with Elijah Griffin. These type of guys, from a physical trait standpoint, they don't grow on trees. But then you get into what he is as a football player right now during his senior year and say, I mean, 69 tackles for loss, 35 and a half sacks going into his senior year, kind of some crazy numbers. And then you turn on the film and say how well he blends, not just being the best athlete on the football field, but also a polished defensive lineman that knows what he's doing. That's where I think Elijah Griffin separates himself from a lot of other defensive linemen that you see in the country. Dive into the film, and we don't need to spend, a ton of time in the film because we all know this kid's a really good football player. But you start getting into in one really, really high IQ football player. He can play three tech, can play the nose. I like him more as a three tech because you give him a little bit more space and you let him impact the game a little bit more with his athleticism. You fire up the film and say, one, I mean, you love to see the IQ. Like, hey, I'm snuffing out this screen, get my big paws up, go make a play. This kid could play tight end if he wanted to. Elijah Griffin's IQ, it's certainly there, and that's something you love to see. But you continue to work through the film and say just the amount of different ways that he can beat offensive linemen. But I think most importantly, the quickness off the football and then how well he uses hand. One, lightning off the line of scrimmage. More importantly, look at the hand usage. I mean, this is a guy that just knows what he's doing as a defensive lineman, is consistently penetrating and blowing up plays, can do it in a lot of different ways. You saw the hand usage. Now we're just going to be really, really quick off the line of scrimmage. When you're trying to get Elijah Griffin on some of those reach blocks, it's pretty much impossible with how good he is off the line. You see him work. I mean, this is exactly how you want it to look. Use that length, bench this offensive lineman off you, disengage, and then go get after the quarterback. I think the polish and how good of a football player he is right now, it's kind of special. I mean, like this is a guy you take a look at how he uses his hands and say, this is a guy that looks like he's been in a college football program, not only physically, but how he's playing the sport for 4 to 5 years. I mean, extremely polished. He knows what he's doing. He's versatile on the defensive line. Again, you're trying to get that reach block on him here, kind of some of that outside zone stuff. No chance. He's just too good. He's too strong at the point of attack. This engages from blocks extremely well. You take a look at Georgia in the 2025 class, and again, this is what you want it to look like, right? The number one defensive lineman in the country in Elijah Griffin, the number one edge rusher in the country in Isaiah Gibson, the number one off-ball linebacker in the country in Zayden Walker. Why has Georgia had so much success over the last couple of years? Because they dominate not only on the recruiting trail, but also development, but they dominate the talent acquisition in the front seven. And Elijah Griffin is one of those kind of guys. And I think the big storyline here heading into this Texas game is Justice Terry, who's the number two defensive lineman in the country, in-state kid from Georgia. Now, the crazy part about Justice Terry is it does feel like Georgia is probably the leader in the clubhouse on this one. I don't think it's as much of a lock, so to speak, as Elijah Griffin felt he was. Justice Terry is going to be on campus for Texas as Georgia plays Texas. That's a massive opportunity for Georgia to put a statement on. You know what I mean? You look at Texas and say that's a program that's going in the right direction, unquestionably. If Georgia can go on the road, take care of business against Texas in front of a guy like Justice Terry, I think that's going to mean a lot in terms of Justice Terry potentially winding up in this Georgia class in 2025. If you're a Georgia fan, and we've kind of talked about this, and maybe y'all disagree, this is kind of my personal take. The last 2 years, going back to 2023 and this year, is there an argument that maybe the difference makers on the defensive line are not the caliber that we've seen from Georgia in 2022 and in 2021? Now, I'll admit that, I think we were spoiled in terms of the difference makers we saw in those defensive lines. Those are some of the better defensive lines that we've seen in all of college football for the last couple decades. That being said, it does seem like there's not as many really, really high level defensive linemen that really can crush a game for Georgia on the defensive line. Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin, those are those kind of guys. And if you can get them both committed for Georgia in this 2025 class, Georgia hasn't gone anywhere. Like, I wouldn't use the term Georgia's going to be back, but it certainly would help Georgia get back to that caliber of defense that we saw in 2021 and in 2022. I still think of really, and Georgia, they ain't done with just Elijah Griffin and Justice Terry. There are multiple guys that, as Kriby Smart gets down to that signing day, likes to turn up the heat on. Justice Terry and Elijah Griffin are some of the top prospects. There's a lot of other names that Georgia is certainly going after in this 2025 class. Going to be an exciting finish. Obviously, a very exciting season that Georgia has ahead of them as well. We'll tut it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.